Hey folks, welcome to Idio Talk, a Radiohead podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Walker Glenn. Just wanted to drop in before the episode and let you know that this is another one where we went much longer than expected and ended up doing a two-part episode. So we're discussing Radiohead's 8th studio album, The King of Limbs. It's their shortest album, and we thought surely we can get all of this in one episode, but we ended up talking about the thing for about 3.5 hours. So this week, you're getting part one of that conversation where we discuss the background, our personal relationship and histories with the album, and everything about the recording and conception of it. Next week, you'll be hearing the second part of that conversation where we go through the album track by track, as well as some of the B-sides and live material. So enjoy this week's episode and make sure to check back in next week to actually listen to the album with us. Without further ado, here's the podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to Idio Talk, a Radiohead podcast. I am one of your hosts, Walker Glenn.
I'm Zach Glenn.
How you doing, Zach?
I'm great.
Big one today.
I know.
Big one, yet maybe also a slight one. We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know. Very excited to be doing another album episode.
Yeah, me too.
It's so funny, like these feel far and few between. And I guess they kind of are.
Yeah.
But yeah, by now listeners will have checked back in with Idiobat.
Mm-hmm.
They'll have enjoyed us talking to another guest. But we got it can't just be all fun and games.
Yeah. Well, does it feel like, in relative terms, because this was a 3.5 year gap between the last studio album, so relatively speaking, does it feel like it's been 3.5 years?
I would say so. Yeah. Once again, the arc of this podcast mirroring the arc of Radiohead. Exactly. We've said that on mic, right?
Yeah.
Because we do talk about this off mic a lot. Like,
Yeah.
We've agreed that our Kid A episode was our Kid A.
Yeah.
And was our Hail to the Thief episode our Hail to the Thief, though? Because Hail to the Thief famously, listeners. I guess that's true, famously uneven. Whatever you think about it, most people agree that it's up and down to some extent or another. Mm-hmm. But I got to say, I think we were firing on all cylinders for the whole 2.5 hours.
Yeah, we were cooking with gas.
Thank you very. Is that a Radiohead lyric?
No, that's.
Oh, are you being topical because gas stoves are?
No, I'm just. That's a phrase that that's just an old dad phrase. We're cooking with gas.
Oh, okay, but
I have heard about the gas stove
controversy.
Yeah. It's scary.
Yeah, pretty stupid if you ask me. Yeah. Another very dumb controversy in America. But yeah, no, so we're obviously here to talk about The King of Limbs today. Mm-hmm. TKOL, as it's called, or Take-Hole. Mm-hmm. Take-Hole.
Total knockout of love.
Total knockout of love. Now, Zach has been describing himself as the king of laughs off and on lately. I've been thinking that I might start calling myself for this episode the king of love. What do you think about that?
That's all right.
I was thinking the king of love making,
well,
but then you got to add an M. Then it's Teakholm, which is not as catchy. But Zach, you know what I realized?
What
is we promised something to our listeners several episodes ago.
Okay.
What was this during? This was
in Rainbows Part 3. Well, if it's what
Disc
I think
2.
Yeah.
Yes, during Disc 2. We crafted on pod, crafted what I think in ambition was meant to be the most annoying post
it was
we
an
could leave.
HTTTHT.
Yes, it was an HTTTHT.
Which is?
That neither of us believe in.
Yeah. Listeners, if you're just joining because King of Limbs is your favorite album, which is quite possible.
They're out there.
An HTTTHT is a Hail to the Thief hot take.
Yes. and if you listened to our HTTT episode, you're no stranger to the fact that Zach and I are slinging these things every which way. But we put one on Reddit, and the hot take that we were going with was that Hail to the Thief is the band's most accessible album. Mm-hmm. Now, nobody feels this way.
Yeah.
People feel it's their best. People feel it's their worst. Nobody that I know of is saying this is the easiest way to get an uninitiated person into radio.
I've never heard that. No,
I've never heard that until Zach and I wrote this post on Reddit. But in the episode, we had a lot of fun making this post as annoying as possible. In the episode, we said we'll check back in the end and let you know how this is being received. Now, several weeks have gone by and we have not done this. So, in case you're not following us on Reddit, we thought we should finally go back and let you know how this was received. Now, do you think I should reread the listeners the post?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Please do.
So, first of all, this is in the Radiohead subreddit. So this is r/Radiohead. And yes, this was posted 36 days ago.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Man, that feels like yesterday.
How time has flown. And what we said here was, first of all, we tagged it spoiler. So the first thing you see is spoiler.
What was it? Did we actually make it a 2-tiered post?
No, it's all one paragraph.
By Jimmy Carter edition that I wanted.
I
wanted it to be a double hot take that Jimmy Carter was our best president and the
Oh, sure. What if it's like hot take? Jimmy Carter served a second term that we just don't talk about. He was the shadow behind Reagan's first term, pulling the strings. So this says, hot take: Hail to the Thief is the band's most accessible album. I was trying to get my boomer parents into Radiohead. I played my mom High and Dry, and she said it was just too weird for her. So I showed her We Suck Young Blood. She said it reminded her of Crazy on You by Heart, and now she can't get enough. If you are hungry to get someone into Radiohead, Hail to the Thief is just hands down the easiest place to start. Although I'd skip over There since it's probably the weakest song on the album. Right? Really twisting the knife at the end there. Because I also don't know anybody that doesn't acknowledge that There is a great song.
Yes, absolutely not.
So I just want to read a few of the comments. And first of all, first comment or most upvoted comment is somebody who I think gets that we're having a little fun.
Excellent.
So this is
Reddit's good for that, I feel like. People get pissed, people behave like it's the internet, but I do feel like there's a possible understanding of sarcasm a little bit more, probably because it's focused on a thing rather than just like a status update or something. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. Please go ahead.
First of all, I should say that this post is holding steady with 0 upvotes right now. So I did, half jokingly say Zach and I are basically celebrities on the Radiohead forum on Reddit. It is only half joking. We have each done some posts that have done really big numbers on the Radiohead Reddit. So this is an outlier that this one has been so negatively received.
Yes.
But this first person, like I said, I think they get that we're having a little fun because
we're having a laugh.
JRob370 says, Polk/Pole revolving doors is the only thing that got through to my 4-year-old sister.
I want to hang out with that guy.
Very much.
Very good sense of humor.
And then a person commented under that, I'm sure she also belongs to Mensa then. Okay, so next thing, getting into a little more of what we were intending, which is pissing people off. Let's see, how would you say this? Petrieu XZZX says, how is There the weakest song? And then under them, Matt 625 says, craziest thing I've seen today. And then somebody else also kind of pulling the curtain back a little bit says, this is a bait post, probably.
Right.
So some people are like, this is too annoying to be real.
Did it make it over to Radiohead Circle Jerk?
That comes up later in the
All
comments. Let me see if this one's worth reading. This is somebody
just taking it kind of at face value. They're not getting mad. They say it's different for every person.
Are they being earnest?
They're being earnest.
Oh, sweet
They
baby
say there's no objectively best gateway. Depends on the person's taste.
Oh, I also want to hang out with this person.
HCTT could definitely work, but it's really not universal. Sit down, stand up isn't for everyone. Backdrifts and the gloaming might be. So this is a person just, I'm not mad at this.
That's Nice Guy 56, right?
Yeah, exactly. What the fuck did you say about there? They're the weakest when backdrift / gloaming exists? And then people just arguing about the
yes. There's sub conversations.
Yes, then there's just an argument about the merits of backdrifts and gloaming.
Of course there are.
And then Zach, somebody said, when you read a post and have to check whether you're on Radiohead Circle Jerk or not. Now, somebody responded to that and said, I mean, this dude is active in both subs, so it's a worthwhile question.
See, listeners, celebrity status.
I did, so I was not completely kidding when I say we are known entities in here. And we really, nothing I have posted since this post has been as well received as my high watermarks either. So I do think I kind of shot some of my credibility here. Let's see, more earnest, it depends on the person, etc. The LSU fan 79 says that's a Mercury hot take and wrong.
Oh.
Somebody else says, There is the only proper classic song on the album. So this person's British.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
The only proper classic song on the album, which is its big downfall. It wants to be the Benz meet OKC, but doesn't have the singles and overcompensates with length.
And I would just contend, I'm sorry to interrupt,
no,
but
that's
that
fine.
It wants to be OKC meets Kid A.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think so as well.
I don't think there's a lot of the bends to be found on this album, although I think some of the grooviness in Go to Sleep
and I really
is
liked
Benz-ish.
In the album opener too, not to recapitulate our HTTT, but how you said that 2 + 2 = 5 is kind of them playing at a Ben's volume and speed and strength, but with all the knowledge they've accumulated.
That's it. That's all we got on this post. I mean, I would say 2 people sussed out that we were having a larf, and a lot of people just wanted to discuss if Hail to the Thief is good or not. And to that I say, we did not say Hail to the Thief is the best album. We said it is the most accessible. I didn't say nice wig. I said bestest looking wig. I believe there is a difference. So anyway, I do think that this maybe hurt us in the long run in terms of, because I did a post not long after that I thought was good. So people were once again debating when Radiohead are going to do something together again because Phil gave an interview.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That honestly was the same vagary that it has been what Ed has been saying all this time. I don't think it gave really any new hope or it didn't dash or bring any new hopes for me.
It was very much a Radiohead member interview.
Yes.
Of the 3.
Yes.
That give interviews. Speaking of mothers and Radiohead, though, didn't you think it was sweet that our mother, who is no longer listening, sent us a link to that interview?
Yeah.
I thought that was very kind.
Yeah, I thought so too. She's just like, hey, I don't know how it came across her desk, but she knew where to send it.
She's like a huge Radiohead fan, but still won't listen to our podcast.
I'm sure there's a lot of people who fit that exact description. I mean, not that I do think that it's not probably a Mercury hot take to say I do think Radiohead has more fans than this podcast.
Yeah.
And
they've been around longer,
That's right. We'll get there.
We're big in Israel.
Yeah,
exactly. Blown up in the U.S.
Yes. Right now we're more of the smile. But ultimately, I do think that I hurt my credibility in this community a little bit because not that long later, I did a post referencing people talking about if Radiohead were going to get back together again. Okay, let me lay this on you. Let me tell you if you can picture this.
Okay.
So, title, Dad, when are Radiohead getting back together? And then a picture of Dermot Mulroney from Angels in the Outfield putting on sunglasses saying, I'd say when the Angels win the pennant.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get the joke?
Yeah, Angels in the Outfield, and it might never happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
18 upvotes on that one.
But
Zach.
I think I saw an explosive comment thread, though.
No.
I don't.
One comment.
Oh, no shit.
Now, then my next post was...
I don't know if I understood this next one. You might have to explain it to me.
So it was a picture of... It says, happy birthday to Radiohead's No Surprises, which was released 25 years ago today. And it's a picture of Tom York in the water tank.
Uh-huh.
And I said, well, we should probably get him out of there then.
Oh.
Just the joke being...
It's very obvious. I don't know how I missed that.
Yeah.
Okay.
That one did a little better. That one got 77 upvotes.
Okay.
So...
How many upvotes did your listeners... I just want to tell you, my brother, I think, has many talents, but I think you make hilarious memes.
Oh, thank you.
How many upvotes did my favorite meme that you've ever made of it was leading up to our Hail to the Thief episode. It was Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, and it's one of the iconic shots from the end of the film when he's talking with he's in a ward essentially. I think I saw it up there a little bit.
Yeah, no, I'm just checking if I think that has,
and you captured it like Radiohead fans when
that's the best reaction anything I've ever posted on here, guys.
And it's just could you describe it to the listeners, please?
It's Radiohead fans who claim Hail to the Thief as their favorite, and it shows Joaquin Phoenix saying you would get it. That one holding strong at number one with 1,340 upvotes.
Fuck yeah, that's
and
great.
a 217 comment discussion.
Yeah, it devolves quickly. That's where Radiohead is, just like the internet everywhere else, is the de-evolution of
You can't mention Hail to the Thief without like just causing complete chaos among the Radiohead community.
I know. It's like walking into a room and being like, well, I think they should have taken abortion away. It's that much of a... You have to be able to joke about the injustices in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. You mean that that people can still get abortions?
Yes, that's exactly what I meant.
Just kidding. Listeners, just kidding. Well, you know what, Zach? I think that...
Speaking of abortions...
Yes.
Let's go ahead.
Speaking of abortions, we're going to argue about that for the next 2 hours. And we brought a guest on, an aborted baby, who is really against it.
Oh,
I was going to cut all this. No, I was going to say, I think similarly to Hail to the Thief being a real grenade anytime you throw it into conversation with the Radiohead fan, I think that the album we're here to discuss, I would say not quite to the same extent. I don't think it has quite the level of detractors or advocates maybe that Hail to the Thief does, but similarly, I think that we're talking about a divisive one in the Radiohead catalog today. And that, of course, is The King of Limbs. Mm-hmm. You already look like you have thoughts on the fact that I called it divisive. I think you may have called it this in one of our discussions. It's a bit of a forgotten one.
Yeah, I call it the Invisible Album, and I think the comparison to Hail to the Thief, and I mean, you know what? It's Radiohead were at their 8th of their total of 9 studio albums. Mm-hmm. So, of course, there's just going to be a lot of comparison, as different as they are per album, yada, yada. But I call it the Invisible Album. And, of course, this is probably just because I'm looking at it through Zach's prism. As we talk about the release and the sales and all that, you'll see that it was quite visible. But what I mean to say by that is, Hail to the Thief, as you call it, like a grenade. Even the album artwork, Hail to the Thief, when we talked about it with guest Kailani Glenn, it pops so much, it catches your eye. And whether you like it or not is subjective. Whereas I think I think The King of Limbs, like you said, forgotten. I called it invisible, and people typically just put it at number 2 if they're ranking. Number 2 at the bottom. I mean, Pablo Honey at the bottom. But yeah, I mean, I haven't scoured Reddit at all for The King of Limbs. I'm sure there's a lot of hot takes that it's their best album.
There is a vocal contingent of hot take. The King of Limbs is their best album. But
and I wasn't trying to be pedantic or disagree. I
think you're right. I think that, we'll get into the release and overview of the album more generally in a moment here. I'm going to kick it back to you. But I actually will say, I think that though this album is the subject of debate among Radiohead fans, I think the Invisible Album is a good way to put it, Zach, because not only can I corroborate that with my own experience with this album, but Tom has kind of spoken to this too.
Oh, no.
I was reading an article where a year on from King of Limbs, he was kind of saying it kind of felt like the album didn't exist. And
that makes me feel so much not much better, because I'm not saying that's been my experience per se, but that the fact that somebody who presumably poured his heart and soul into it could feel that way even just a year on when he's still touring the album. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and he likened that to the fact that they announced it only 4 days before they released it. So we'll get into that in more detail, but I just would say that that feeling exists, at least among the Tom contingent of the band, and I'm really excited to talk about this album because this one has been, I think, the most blind that I've come to one of the albums we've discussed so far.
Okay.
I've listened to it a lot, always in its entirety every time I put it on over the last few weeks. I have a lot of feelings and opinions about it, but that is new. I would not have told you I didn't like this album before. What I would tell you is it came out, I listened to it a few times, I knew there was a couple songs that I dug, and I kind of just forgot about it and, up to this point. I wasn't mad at it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't stick with it, and I didn't really give it a great deal of consideration up to this point, as opposed to Hail to the Thief, which there were blank spots for me that I realized I'd never given its full due, but I had opinions about the album.
And I would just venture to guess, I mean, you could tell me, but even though you were very forthcoming when we did Hail to the Thief, I still get the sense that when you were getting super into Radiohead post In Rainbows, that because 2 + 2 = 5 pops so much and they're there, and Wolf at the Door, which are a beginning, middle, and end, you had probably gone through it more times than King of Limbs, even though you were saying that.
And there was like a third of that album that was in consistent rotation with the rest of Radiohead for me.
Sure.
Not the case for King of Limbs, and so I'm really excited to have finally actually given this album its proper consideration and talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Me as well.
Since we're on that, before we get into album background, do you mind maybe talking about kind of your relationship to this album?
Yeah, I have, let me go to my summary here. So I, putting myself in the listener's shoes, and as well as my own, I kind of cringe at the idea of listening to this podcast and being like, these guys fancy themselves to be, Radiohead extremists or whatever, but are kind of repeating the general narrative, which, whatever, but I think that for those listening out there who maybe did listen to King of Limbs from its release up through now with just as much frequency as the others. First of all, you must have a lot of time, but
I like that you apologize and then you kind of put it, get a job, but good for you, I guess.
But all I'm going to say is that my experience and journey is that I listened to this album for a year after it came out, and not only this album, but it's great to run to. When I've been really into exercise, running is kind of my main go-to. But it never engaged me. And after a year of trying, into 2012, I was starting to get into, I've always liked other bands besides Radiohead, but as I talked about, they represent this entry point into a more exploratory kind of mindset and just mindset, towards music, and that's natural at the age that I was. But I always listen to it passively, is what I would say. I've had the kind of job for a while where it's okay if I have headphones in, I don't have to be on the phone or whatever. So I would listen to it in the background there. I would listen to it when I would run. And I when I was listening to it, I would run a lot was from 2011 to 2012. I did put it on the back burner. I would listen to Radiohead constantly. Even to the Bends, and definitely when A Moon-Shaped Pool came out is when I really rediscovered this album.
Okay.
And just like you, I have been listening to it straight through over the last couple months, with a lot more frequency and a lot more engagement. But that's kind of how I describe my journey is, A Moon-Shaped Pool is 7 years ago almost now. And that's when I really re-engaged with it. but only re-engaged with it as far as like background music while I worked. But I started to like it a lot more. A lot of time had elapsed. And I just think that we'll talk about this more as we go through, but this is an album not meant to be passively listened to. It's not background music. For me, this is all just for me, listeners.
Sure.
So that's kind of been my journey with it. Any other Radiohead album, yes, I would listen to it for a year, and then every year after that,
sure,
forever.
Can I ask you a question about that first year of listening?
Yeah, of course.
So this is a bit of a preamble, but I don't know if you had this experience, but for myself, each Star Wars prequel that came out, episodes 1, 2, and 3, there was a period of time where a somewhat lengthy period of time where I was convinced it was great.
Yeah.
Even though by the time 2 came out, by the time Attack of the Clones came out, I already knew that Phantom Menace was bad. By the time, what is the last one called? Return of the Sith?
Revenge of the Sith.
Revenge of the Sith. By the time that came out, I knew the first 2 were bad, but I still walked around.
3 years is a long time for the culture and for people to grow up and ruminate.
Exactly. And at that point, too, kids who are listening, it's now holds very little novelty to be able to see a Star Wars movie in the theaters. But at that
back
time,
in our day,
at that time, the episode 1 was the first one to be released in many years, and the next one 3 years later was all you got. This wasn't owned by Disney at the time.
Right.
They weren't pumping these things out. In any case, did your King of Limbs discovery follow that trend of like, this is the new Radiohead album, this has got to be great, and then it just kind of faded into like relative obscurity for you?
Because I was thinking about that, and I was like, my Radiohead fanship, it's not like, it's not like because I started getting into music that I would say has stuck with me since I was 21, not all of it, but like I mentioned it before. I discovered the band Pinback, and they're not like my favorite band, but I love Pinback, and they do really interesting things with rhythm, with bass, and just a band that, like Radiohead, has stuck with me, and I think there's a lot of layering and depth to it. But just because when I was early 20s, I discovered them and a host of other bands that I still listen to this day, doesn't mean that Radiohead was dethroned. But to your question, yeah, it wasn't like a Star Wars prequel in that I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm revolted by that thing. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to like it so bad. We're talking about when we kind of go through a little bit deeper in terms of the release. I have a funny story that involves you of you alerting me of it. But I did just want to like it so bad because I'm like, it was 4 years after In Rainbows, 3.5 years, right? So I'd been a Radiohead fan for 3.5 years, the last year and a half of which it was like, I got my girlfriend at the time made me a Radiohead birthday cake. So that's how much I had just become so obsessed, and I felt they were intrinsic to my identity and so forth. So to be living in a time when, I get to kind of like reimagine the In Rainbows experience or something like that. And I think that was a lot of folks' experience, whether they were older or younger than me, is that it felt like, oh, if I missed In Rainbows and all that cultural buzz, but as we'll talk about, that was kind of the route Radiohead went, but they didn't replicate that release strategy exactly. I mean, should we just get into the kind of release?
Yeah, what? I think we should. The last thing I wanted to say about kind of my own experience with it, just, only because you're reminding me of it, is that's really interesting. That makes sense. And I think that what kind of happened with me in this album is because I remember it coming out. I remember listening to it, and I remember my impression being that the reaction was pretty muted critically and kind of from the fans. Now, kind of like every Radiohead album.
Yeah, it got acclaim.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because it's like you go and you look at the ones that are supposedly not well received, and it's like, this one is an A- is kind of it tends to be the general feedback.
Yeah.
So in any case, I do remember though the kind of the feeling in the air was that this one was not so great. I think that similarly to you, if this was 2011, I'm still so high on Radiohead.
Oh yeah.
Because as we've covered extensively, the release of In Rainbows caused a complete reappraisal of and also new embrace of everything they had done before in Rainbows. So I'm still so in that that I think I listened to this and kind of was so into Radiohead that I didn't even really bother to be disappointed by it. It just did not surpass the excitement of what I was feeling about In Rainbows still and Kid A and Amnesiac and OK Computer.
You just ended up going back to those a lot. Probably.
Yeah, but I don't remember being like bugged that I didn't like this new one. It just didn't penetrate.
It needs time to breathe. And, we're going to reference throughout. I pulled 3 really, really great articles that as we kind of go through, and I'll cite because I want listeners to be able to find these. But I did read a couple reviews, and I was just thinking, like, man, being a good music critic as a journalist and so forth is so hard because, and the positive reviews are a little vacant, I'll be honest. And not that they're poorly written or anything like that, but I just feel like this album needs time to ruminate in your consciousness, whereas Kid A, for most people, OK Computer, let me go chronologically, OK Computer, Kid A, and In Rainbows seem to grab people immediately. And maybe that did happen, for a lot of folks. It certainly did incredibly well in the United Kingdom in terms of sales. But the articles that I'm referencing, 2 of them are written in 2018, and then one of them is written in 2011. And what's just so incredible about them is the perspective that they have. And I really think that this album fits into Radiohead context so well, kind of like The Eraser in a way. I mean, The Eraser is certainly an influence on this album because that was written by Tom York, but I would say this one is the most directly influenced. And I think for me, I can't speak for you, but why The Eraser jumped out so much is because after Hail to the Thief, if you're listening chronologically, I think there is a lot of sort of bridge to In Rainbows, which people reviewing it at the time didn't have the benefit of, and they said it sounds like watered down Radiohead.
Right.
So I don't know.
I think that's a good point. I don't want to. Now, this is one where obviously we'll discuss the tracks as we listen to them, but I want to kind of, as much as I have the ability to control this, I would like to hold back my kind of overall feelings about the album until we've listened to it. I will say I agree with you that this one is a grower.
Yeah.
And that has been an experience that I have had delving into it for this podcast. So why don't we get into the nitty-gritty a little bit about
of course,
about King of Limbs.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, 4 days before the release of it, they announced that there was a new album coming. The release date was February 18th, 2011. That was actually a day earlier than they had planned. They got everything ready on their website a day early. So it was originally planned for February 19th. So it's just interesting.
I like that.
It was recorded, over a period of 2 years. And we'll kind of talk about that when we, I think, listen to the tracks, or we can talk about it now. But this is not an album that you would spend a few months in the studio recording, kind of like with Hail to the Thief. So May 2009 to January 2011. And when I say January 2011, that's really Nigel ironing out the order of things.
Mastering and
yes.
Mixes.
The length of this album, do you know off the top of your head?
38 minutes?
37, 34. So we're keeping it real short. I will note,
8 tracks.
8 tracks, yes, which is unconventional for a studio album of any band in any genre, unless it's Pink Floyd Dogs. But I'm sorry, Pink Floyd Animals, which is a 5-track album.
Yes.
But In Rainbows is only 41 minutes. So, and is 10 songs, right? And you're like, 4-minute differential? Okay, it's just interesting. We'll talk about it as we go.
You do, but I've been thinking the same thing about it. You do think of this as a really short album, but I think that's just because the track numbers puts that in your head. But 38 is it's short for a Radiohead album, for sure. But I mean, it's not short for an album, period.
Would you mind pulling up Kid A? What's the length of Kid A? Is it 41 minutes?
I'm just thinking too about Weezer. Like the Blue album, I think is like 29 minutes or something.
That's so funny.
Let's see. Kid A,
mate.
Kida. 50 minutes.
Okay, I don't know why I had. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So In
that's
Rainbows would
longer.
be the closest to it in length, then, which I believe In Rainbows is 41 or 42 minutes. We might want to cut the Kid A part, but the label, it was self-released.
Okay. Also, I was wrong. Weezer's Blue album is 41 minutes. So it's not that 38 minutes isn't short. It's just this album isn't as short as you think it is.
Yeah, ask a
based on
5-year-old that 38 minutes is an eternity. But it was self-released, and also XL, like with their last album, XL did then release the box set, which we'll talk about when that came in a second.
Yeah, so Radiohead still a unsigned band at this point.
Yes, absolutely. Produced by Nigel Godrich.
They got Nigel for this one.
They did. Well, hey, we talked about in that last episode that sometimes you got to get Nigel back.
He's like, "Oh, are you sure you wouldn't rather have Spike do this one?" It's like trying to like stay together after an affair where it's just like there's just too much.
Do you like the way
done.
Spike touches the knob better? The genre,
and that works on two levels because knob
yes,
is
that's
British slang.
The best jokes are the one you have to explain in excruciating detail.
Sorry.
So this
Kill the
genre
rhythm.
I loved it. Is experimental rock and electronica. I don't know that Radiohead chooses how it's going to be labeled online and so forth, but just looking at other Radiohead albums, they are not defined as such. Then I have I know this is where you'll have some things to offer as well, but on the background recording production release, Radiohead wanted to avoid the prolonged recording process associated to In Rainbows. Whether or not that was successful, we'll talk about in a second. But the band wasn't looking to make another landmark album, but they were instead looking at this as a more transitionary period for their sound, which is interesting. And that's not a direct quote. That is a quote from Bryce Edge, one of the band's managers. So it is somebody reiterating a summation from the band, but still somebody in the circle. And I think it's very interesting that I think you said that, like, at the end of In Rainbows, this is a beginning of a very different era. And it's interesting, whether it's hindsight or not, that the band would even see it that way, right? It's sort of embracing of like, hey, we know where we're at. We know what we just did, which is really impressive to me.
I think that this is a transitionary record, but it's not the pained transition of a Kid A, right? Something that is so labored over. So like, and came out, perfect, right? But it's like, it's a very pained process. And this, I think the long recording period to me speaks to actually a much more casual approach.
Absolutely.
Than, oh, we're fucking 2 years into trying to turn this into our new masterpiece and we're pulling our hair out. It's kind of like, seems like Radiohead was like, yeah, we're doing it.
Yeah.
When we feel like it.
And
that is corroborated by things that the band said.
Yes, absolutely. And you mentioned Kid A. Other albums have and will come up throughout, but I think if I could put myself in the shoes of a listener who loved Radiohead from, Pablo Honey to OK Computer, or maybe the Bends to OK Computer, and hearing Kid A, and say this listener is somebody who loved it immediately, like Casey, who we've had on the show, or Jesse Rimler, whomever. Right. I can't imagine that there wasn't surprise, and like we said, you've said reinvention. When I do remember when I heard this album for the first time, and even when I re-embraced it in 2016, there was never a point in which it was unfamiliar to me, like maybe a Kid A would have seemed, even if you loved it, right? So I think what is interesting is that where it doesn't align with Kid A in that fashion, and you know what I'm saying? Because like I remember hearing it and being like, oh, it's calm, oh, it's short, but those don't speak to like the musicality, and then I'm like, who is this? Is James Hetfield singing or something like that? And not that Kid A was that jarring, but I think you get what I'm gesturing at. And I don't know. That's just, I think, to me, you see a lot of comparisons to Kid A, but to me, what this really reminds me of, even though it's a totally unique statement, is Amnesiac. And I say that because I do think now, listening to it as much as I have and the other albums as well, and where it slides in the chronology and what comes after it, it really feels like a continuation of In Rainbows.
Right.
And why there are certain tracks that I think call back to some on Amnesiac. And that's not what the thrust of this episode is going to be about, but I think just from an artwork perspective, sort of the mutedness of it, it is calmer than Amnesiac. You don't have like an I Might Be Wrong on it or a Life in a Glass House, but if In Rainbows is their, second crowning achievement or third, I think that this, and if you think about if Amnesiac had taken 4 years to come out from
Right.
Kid A, I really think that maybe it would have been a less celebrated or maybe more muted or more invisible album such
Sure.
as this. What do you think?
I think that's so you're saying you think this is what Amnesiac is to Kid A, this is to In Rainbows.
Yes, absolutely. Not a 1-for-1, but that's what it reminds me of.
No, I think I'm with that. I think that, last time when we talked about In Rainbows, I remember we talked about that, in my opinion, I don't know if you feel this way or not. In my opinion, In Rainbows is the last time Radiohead reinvents their sound.
Yeah.
And having really listened to this album a lot now, I do stand by that. It's not that it sounds just like In Rainbows. It doesn't.
No.
But I do think that with Radiohead's albums following In Rainbows, you don't hear them doing something that is wholly unfamiliar anymore.
Right.
And I do think that this follows. I think that this shares slightly less connective tissue sound-wise with In Rainbows than Amnesiac does with Kid A.
Yeah.
But I can see how it's an extension of like the kind of mode they were in certain ways. I would say it departs from it in one big way
Yes,
that
absolutely.
we'll get into.
And that's what's really fun. And yeah, we'll get into it. So let me just talk about the release and sales a little bit. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We're still on the recording. So, going back to In Rainbows, those songs were developed and refined by being played live, right? Not exclusively, but we did talk about that in our disc 2 and just even in episode 1 as well. And the King of Limbs songs were developed largely by studio experimentation. Much of the King of Limbs was assembled by looping and re-editing samples of their playing. There's some really cool videos online showing kind of how the band worked in collaboration with Nigel and doing that, which also reminded me of Kid A. It's so funny that it says that I wrote down here, like, here's how it's different from In Rainbows. But then I want to harken back to, I think it was when Nigel took him back to Tottenham House in Rainbows. Remember, he took all the rhythm tracks and said, "You're done with those."
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's kind of what he did here too, to create the loop. So it's really, even though it's more studio focused and they're not developing the songs live, it's like, that's really not that different. And I saw that cited online and in a book I have, and it's talking about how different they are. And I'm like, he basically did the same thing for In Rainbows too.
Yeah. I mean, Nigel's job really seems to be like, the one to go enough fucking about. This is kind of what we're doing.
And God, did he have a job, because the final results of this took Nigel roughly 18 months to unravel and assemble into songs.
Sure.
Now, when I say that, I don't mean that like that Lotus Flower is Tom singing backwards and that they didn't have authorship over it. But these songs were written by Radiohead, but then kind of in the Kid A vein again, reassembled, except this time, I don't want to speak out of turn here, but like, they were written and recorded by Radiohead, but the way you hear a song unfold isn't necessarily how it was recorded, which is also in line with the Eraser a little bit as well.
Sure. I think it is different, though, because it's kind of an obfuscation of their usual process, which is something new that they're doing here. Now, when I say that I don't think Radiohead is reinventing themselves with King of Limbs or A Moon-Shaped Pool, which we will save our thoughts about that. But with these last 2 studio albums, doesn't mean they're not doing something different.
Totally.
Because this is a new process for them where they basically are sampling themselves.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is samplings of live instrumentation.
Yeah.
So they're taking live drum tracks, guitar tracks, bass, and everything. There are synth and digital instruments being played, but a lot of this is guitar, bass, and drum noise just sampled and looped.
Yes.
And a lot of it is done on software developed by Johnny Greenwood.
Each member of the band actually developed a software.
Oh, no kidding. I didn't come across that.
Yeah, which is interesting to me. And so I again, saw this in multiple sources. It just is hard to get a little bit more detail on that because, we know Ed doesn't know how to use a computer. No, I'm kidding. But I think more what that is probably accurate is that Nigel probably worked with each member in conjunction because the goal was to have the software that they were using for their instrument be different per member.
Okay.
Which is so cool.
Yeah.
Because I think that you do hear some variance, even though in the mixing, some instruments on certain songs are a lot more, it's difficult to hear other instruments sometimes. Well, what I mean to say is like the drums will be stronger in the mix on certain songs than say the bass.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some songs where everything is synthesized equally, and man, is that just so cool to think about.
Yeah, and I just think that this is relevant because it's an unusual process, and it also, I think when you're listening to this album, if you don't know that and you're wondering why it doesn't sound quite analog or acoustic or electronic, it's because it's both.
Yes, and that is what I love so much about this band and about Nigel and about their level of experimentation. It's not that this is a reinvention of the band, and because like I said, like when I heard it, even for the first time, 21-year-old Zach, it wasn't wholly unfamiliar, right? Because I knew Tom's voice and I knew that they liked some level of digitization in certain songs in certain eras. But the fact that they're going to go about exploring a well-trod genre, but do something in a way that, you know, conceivably hadn't been done before is so cool. And it just shows how much they love sound, right? They don't love Radiohead. They don't love Paranoid Android. They don't love, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
They love, it's so exciting to me. And anyways, but just on the release and sales.
Can we actually talk about where this was recorded? Because I think this is very interesting.
Oh, yes, please. You take it away.
So, okay. It was very hard to like verify how much of the album was done here, but they recorded this fucker at Drew Barrymore's house
for 3 months.
That's what they say. But listen, there's nothing.
Oh, you mean Sugar?
Yes, I want to talk about this. So Drew Barrymore, familiar to listeners of the podcast as Sugar, who we talked about extensively on our Batman Forever episode.
We did.
I think it is so funny that this is coming up so close to on the heels of our Batman Forever episode.
Continuing the arc of the band.
Thank you. Right. And also we were like, oh, this Batman movie has nothing to do with Radiohead. It has everything to do with Radiohead. It was as if Drew Barrymore heard us in another life and was like, I'm going to have Radiohead record here. So first of all, Drew Barrymore seems very cool to me. Has seemed like, you know, kind of like Hollywood hipster, like child of Hollywood.
Yeah. Seems relatively grounded for never having had a normal life.
Comes off as a cool person, but I also just meant cool in that, like, she seems like she has cool taste.
Yeah, I
and like I know that she off and on for many years dated the drummer from the Strokes. So she's like in this, like, you know, kind of, she has connections to the alternative music world.
Yeah.
All that to say, it doesn't surprise me that she likes Radiohead. It does surprise me a little bit that she's affiliated with Radiohead. Just kind of like picturing what my understanding of those personalities. She comes off, and who knows how people are in their private life, but she comes off very gregarious, bubbly, positive, kind of big energy person. And I would say Radiohead does not. And so that
Johnny, can I get you a drink of water? No, thank you.
So that
Colin, you play so well.
And everyone, yeah, I kind of picture everyone in Radiohead being very like shy of her, and like a little bit like it's just like, oh no, there's a pretty girl in here.
Do you think though that maybe it's just saying that because it's a fun fact, and I know the boys can afford homes in different countries. Do you think maybe though that she's a fan of the band, the home was large enough that it had like a studio space and she simply owned it?
Here's what
they weren't roommates, were they?
I've got an article pulled up right here. Was Radiohead's, this is from The Guardian. So this is, you know, a legitimate news source. Took the time to report on this.
Totally.
In between, like, you know, in between famine in Yemen and like, you know, and a tsunami somewhere, they were just like, was Radiohead's new album recorded at Drew Barrymore's house?
Will Mitt Romney defeat Obama?
Yeah. That's the speculation after news that the Oxford Quintet have thanked Barrymore in the King of Limbs sleeve notes while omitting any mention of a recording studio. That's the most interesting thing to me and I was doing more research about this, and unlike their other albums, they have not bothered to state where they recorded at. Now, I know Nigel has a studio in LA.
Oh, yeah.
And stuff like that. But so it says, this is in the CD booklet. What's it say?
Very bottom right there. Last line.
Yep. A big thank you very much indeed to Drew Barrymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, you know, they recorded over, as you said, over a period of 2 years. It's highly doubtful that they were at Drew Barrymore's house that whole time.
Right.
But it does seem like the omission is kind of a big tell that a lot of this was possibly done at Drew Barrymore's house.
Which I'm cool with that, because I don't disagree with any of the appraisal you had. She seems like a sorry, keep going. It seems like you have more.
That's it. I just am fascinated by this, and I would have. I don't know if there's anything in Radiohead's history that I would like to be a fly on the wall more at than them interacting with Drew Barrymore. Now, Zach, because Drew Barrymore is Sugar,
right,
in Batman Forever lore,
right.
And that means now that Drew Barrymore and Sugar are forever affiliated with this album, The King of Limbs. Mm-hmm. What is Debbie Mazar, a.k.a. Spice? What album is she?
Hail to the Thief.
You got it in one. What is their most evil album? It is absolutely Hail to the Thief, right?
Yeah.
I made your favorite, honey. Sampled instruments played back through loops and itty bitty drum sounds.
That's Drew Barrymore. Is itty bitty
this is her.
I see. I'm sorry.
With the itty bitty syncopated drum sounds,
kind of a bounciness.
Yeah. A quieter vibe. No, I made your favorite.
A through composed opener, a bombastic midpoint, followed by an abusive story to cap it all off.
The jazz freak out of We Suck Young Blood with off time claps, baby. Radiohead, you have to balance the scales. You need to record an album at Debbie Mazar's house for no other reason than it would really nicely just the narrative completion that we would get to experience on this podcast.
You were talking about the interactions you'd like to be a fly on the wall for in terms of like Radiohead and famous folks. We had talked about in our second OK Computer episode, we talked about it with guest Casey Pegram very quickly, that Tom Cruise was I don't know.
He's a big fan.
He's a big fan, and he saw them. The reason why it's not crazy that he saw them on the OK Computer tour and on the Kid A tour and some of their earliest shows, but he did not get VIP treatment because it was just like, I mean, the fact that he was there but like he just like had to buy a ticket and go sit in. So he's like was a legit fan at that time, and I would love to see just Tom Cruise, because I'm sure he got to go backstage after. He got to at the OKC show, right? Just, in his Tom Cruisey smoothness. How you doing? Hi. Shaking Tom York's hand. Like, just what the dynamics of that interaction would be. So charming. So, like, fits the part. I just would love to see that interaction.
I bet it would be a super uncomfortable interaction.
I do, too. That's why,
York is, like, at his, like, most anxious, seemingly, at that time in their career.
Anyways,
what else about this album background wise?
So
I think we've laid a pretty good foundation of kind of the recording process, right?
Yeah, I feel so, and that'll of course come up as we go through the tracks in some capacity. But Radiohead announced The King of Limbs on their website on February 14th, 2011, as previously discussed. The album was released 4 days later on February 18th, one day ahead of schedule, for £6 sterling, or this is a modern day conversion, but $7.43 USD. The King of Limbs was released on CD and vinyl on March 28th.
Which I think is a really smart follow-up to how they did In Rainbows, because it's like, we're not going to do that same model every time, but they're sticking with the idea that their fans get to pay a fair price.
I agree, Walker. It is such a nice parallel to what the album is. They're not trying to break a business model or reinvent something, right? They're not going back to. They didn't re-sign with EMI. Anyway, so yes,
they're not, and they're not going from $0 to $20. It's just
right,
but it's just like, now we're just gonna kind of do things in a slightly more standardized way.
Absolutely. So it was released on CD and vinyl on March 28th, 2011 by XL in the United Kingdom and TBD Records in the USA.
Oh, also, I think it's worth noting, too, that this £6 price was another massive cash windfall for the band. They made a shitload of money.
Well, that leads right into my next point, which is so The King of Limbs was exclusively available on Radiohead's website for nearly 2 months prior to retail release. The album sold 300 to 400,000 downloaded copies in this time, which is a lot. Chris Hufford, remember we mentioned Chris Hufford and Bryce Edge are their two of their managers. They estimated that the band made more money from The King of Limbs than any previous releases, including In Rainbows, because the majority of their sales came through their website with no record company, right? Now, I cannot find a source to validate this like I could with the $2.26 per album they made on In Rainbows, which was more. So I say that I couldn't find a source to validate because this, I believe, not knowing how this business functions, but just knowing a little bit in hindsight, that this was most likely due to Radiohead negotiating a higher percentage. Because there's still overhead to record an album, right? Because In Rainbows, because of the success of In Rainbows, and they taught a new economic model to consumers and fans, right? So they didn't charge more, like you said, but I think that even though, you know what I'm saying? Like there's still a lot of cost associated to,
Right.
Hosting it on their website, etc. So whomever else is behind the scenes that charges them a fee to do whatever, I think Radiohead has a little bit more of an upper hand in this, and that is probably why they net it. Because in terms of actual sales volume, that's not higher than In Rainbows in terms of digital copy. So I think that 4 years time had passed, and a lot of other artists had tried to release something in a pay what you want model to success. But and Radiohead, by the way, they were the first to do it in this era, but U2 actually did something sort of similar with Octune Baby, and we could talk about that later. But yes, the release of In Rainbows was a wholly new idea, essentially, and I really think that that people, the companies around them, were sort of whatever you want, because we know it's going to be this incredible thing, and I think that probably is what earned them a little bit more money. That's speculative.
They're chilling. Radiohead is chilling with this one.
Yeah. Now
and maybe that's your thing, maybe it isn't, but I definitely think there's a vibe that they're like taking it a little easy.
Absolutely. So we already talked about our personal background. I do want to get into the tracks, but I just wanted to share that Walker called me on that Monday, February 14th, 2011, to alert me of the coming release. And it's
zero memory of this.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, memory is just such a fickle and unreliable way to like accurately craft a narrative that is like absolutely true, right? Because memory is just so funny that way.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just think that like I remember you saying like Radiohead has a new album, and I was like, oh, what's it called? How do I find it? And you just being like, it's called The King of Limbs. And I don't want to like conflict the memory or whatever. But I just, the reason why I'm bringing this back up is because I remember guest Jesse Rimler, when he was talking about his feelings of hearing the name of Hail to the Thief, because his fanship had peaked around Kid A and Amnesiac. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but that was kind of my understanding. Sure. And I remember he said this really great thing of, it felt like all the decision making that they had made up to Hail to the Thief was so good, and it somehow made sense. Kid A and Amnesiac somehow made sense as album titles,
right?
The covers, and Hail to the Thief. He's like, so. Again, paraphrasing, but Radiohead, they're like a bumper sticker now.
Right.
And I didn't have that experience because Hail to the Thief, by the time I found my way to it, was 5 years old. So it just all made sense in chronology because it wasn't like the new Radiohead, But I kind of can empathize with that a little bit.
Yeah.
We just talked about, I tried to listen to it for a year. I found my way to it. We'll talk about my overall feelings of it now, maybe at the end. But I just wanted to share that because I remember just hearing a little bit of what I perceived as like a little bit of like, from you, but you're still really excited,
Sure.
And then when the album released, and because there is no Body Snatchers, there is no Jigsaw, maybe I would cite those two at least. There's no 15 Step even, in terms of just, again, we can go through more of the details I have as we go through the tracks, but that was sort of the last thing I wanted to share.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the title is, I could see being a little bugged by it. I don't remember that, but it definitely has a kind of, it's leaning into a Radiohead tendency that is maybe not I'm not even saying I don't like it or that they don't pull it off most of the time, but it's probably not my favorite Radiohead tendency, which is when they're a little Tim Burton-y in aesthetic. And
it's a really, really good comparison.
Yeah.
That I had not thought of.
And look, I don't feel too strongly about the title either way at this point in my life. I think it's kind of a King of Limbs. It's not my favorite of their titles. It has an air of a slight pretension to it that I would say makes it not my favorite. I don't really mind it. It's fine. That's kind of how I feel about the title, that it's fine. How do you feel about it?
I really like it. I want to close the episode with my feelings on the artwork.
Sure.
But as far as the title goes, so a little tease for you listeners, listen to the whole episode. Hear how Zach feels
about the art.
But no, I was reading a little bit about Stanley Donwood and Tom York's collaboration in the artwork, which is tied in with the title. And it's sort of, there's a lot of images of trees and roots and limbs. It's not talking necessarily. It is funny because of the album artwork. I always pictured the human limb, like arms and legs. But, I really like that because if you sort of think about how the album sounds, and it is sort of a branch off and, like the long roots that, you can't see, and that are so the tendrils that are sort of touching everything. And it's not the tree itself. It's not the core, which maybe the core is Paranoid Android and Everything in Its Right Place and Body Snatchers or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Like spanning eras, but very much Radiohead or Pyramid Song as well. It's sort of the tendrils reaching out. And they didn't say it was that direct, but there was a lot of allusions to that. And I think that is a very, 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 very good description of the album in like a visual sort of metaphoric sense.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea that you're kind of putting out there of it also fitting nicely with this being a bit of an offshoot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I guess it's just probably the most uninteresting way you could feel for a podcast is that I don't have a strong opinion about this title. But
no, but
yeah.
I mean, that's fine. Like, I think, I don't think the goal... I think it people pick up on it, if it's like if we came to this actually hating it and pretended to like it, or were like in our Hail the Thief episode, I loved how you really tried, and I know you don't hate that album, but like kind of the way you had maybe previously felt is sort of where you ended up again. Is that semi-accurate?
Oh, I'm not gonna say.
No, with Hail to the Thief.
Oh, I think with Hail to the Thief, I ended up feeling a great deal stronger about the album like I feel really strongly about the songs that I love, and I would say the songs I like I love, and the songs I don't like I kind of hate, and that is not how I felt about it. I felt kind of just like a little bit blah about it before that. So that one is definitely like invoked like the strongest polarized reactions in me for sure.
I think it's fine to have like a nonplussed reaction is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, titles, I don't know if I super care that much what an album is called. Like an album that I like, I don't know that there's a title that is going to be bad enough to subtract from how I feel about the album. I think if I've never thought about this, but I think that the reason I would say this is one that is a lesser favorite than a favorite title for me would be because I think their best title, just off the top of my head, having never thought about it, for me might be OK Computer. And I think the reason I think it's a great title is it's really of its time in the best possible way. It really evokes the late 90s to me, and it really brings up all the feelings and themes and sounds on the album. Similarly, I would say Kid A, Amnesiac, and In Rainbows all also really bring up the way that those albums sound and feel. I would say Hail to the Thief, King of Limbs, Moon-Shaped Pool.
Yeah, when they use 4 words, they tend to be a little bit more ambiguous.
Yeah, I would say that Moon-Shaped Pool,
stick to 1 or 2 Radiohead,
King of Limbs, Hail to the Thief, and the Bends actually all sound a little more randomized to me, and they don't make me particularly think about the music.
Okay,
The
yeah.
way those other ones do. None of them are bad titles, just none of them do much for me.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
That's very, very interesting because I think those three in particular have I would say the bands King of Limbs and A Moon-Shaped Pool all evoke sort of a similar imagery for me that we will get to at the end with the artwork.
Okay, great. Let's take a pause.
Okay.
Are we ready to get into the tracks? Idiotalk is a Glenn Brothers production. Get in touch with us at idiotalk.podcast@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at idiotalk.podcast. Thanks for listening.